Science came out when I was 21. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I can't say that any of us really did. Hey! Hey! Do you know why he sets up sideways? He doesn't want to fucking look at me. I was shunned. I didn't like dead space. I didn't like air. It's only later in life that I've learned to appreciate the note that wasn't played as opposed to the note that was.
20,000 looms up under the sea. I'm on a mission impossible.
It's outrageous.
This is just some bullshit.
They won't even know what happened.
I've had a lot of years to reflect on what it all means. Some of the great things, some of the hard things. I can't be stuck in 25 years ago. When can you hear that and when can you learn that lesson?
We're here today with Alex Katunich, but we know him as Dirk Lance, original bassist with Incubus 91 to 03, playing on the legendary records Fungus Among Us, Enjoy Incubus, Science, Make Yourself, and Morning View. He was the reason everybody wanted a Warwick bass. And after Incubus, he was part of Willie's Nerve Clinic, 4-player co-op, and most recently, East of June. And he is here with us today. I'm going to try to just keep the fanboy at bay. He's going to talk about some of his most incredible bass lines of his career, his gear, what he's up to right now. Mr. Lance, welcome to SBL.
I'm sorry, Mr. Lance was my dad. Good to see you, man. Good to
see you too. Good to see you too. Do people call you Dirk? Do they call you Alex? What do they call you?
They call me both. People who don't know me personally tend to call me, Dirk a little bit more. My family doesn't call me Dirk. That would be weird. But, I respond to that and hey you. So
awesome. We'll be fine then. We'll be fine. We are going to dive in right now to one of my favorite Incubus tunes of all time, Certain Shade of Green.
That was a magical time. The pants were big.
This just smashed me when it came out. Like, I couldn't believe how powerful it sounded.
Well, never met a song I couldn't overplay on, so, it's a fun part. What can I say? And there was a lot of energy behind it.
It's incredible. I mean, a finger thing, then slapping?
Yeah. Yeah, it's, the line itself is actually Phrygian, I would say, in the chorus.
Yeah.
Who knew? Yeah, it's a Phrygian line, and, what is it?
Yeah.
And then the turnaround just goes into the slap part there. The trick is you got to play it harder than it should be played because that's how I played everything.
Show me that again. Are you? This is outrageous, dude. It's so fun to hear you.
It is outrageous, isn't it?
It's outrageous.
This is just some bullshit. No, it's great.
Play that thing again, man.
Yeah, the verse is. Almost a little tritone, flat 5 sort of thing, and at speed. So it's just a lot of thumb.
So where did that thing come from for you? Like, were you a Larry Graham guy? Were you a Les Claypool guy? Or where did the slap love come from for you?
There's a few different ways for progression as a bass player, the things that I grew up listening to. And kind of one of the first records I ever had, and it was legitimately a record because that's how old I am, was my parents had a tiny little plastic Fisher-Price record player for me. And since I was born in the 70s, like they had Disco Duck by Disney. It was like Disney songs, but done in a disco style.
Okay.
So it was string arrangements and stuff like that. So I was hearing funky stuff at an early age, but the real kind of pivot came from a few different records. Trujillo and Infectious Grooves.
Oh, yes.
That was just like, whoa. And then I think it was Billy Gould with Faith No More.
Oh, of course.
The Real Thing as a record was just like you could hear the bass and it was just front and center. And then you get into Les and Primus, and I was never going to be able to be Les. If you've ever seen his hands, he looks like he's playing like with Tony Levin's finger extenders, but that's his actual hand.
The funk fingers, yes.
Yeah, the funk fingers. Like I've got tiny hand, like dwarfish hands. I have very tiny. I shouldn't be a bass player, but kind of coming into a love of Primus and what was so like syncopated about just the rhythm stuff.
Yes.
Had to figure out a way to do something like that. And since we didn't, as a band, know how to lay back, everything was falling forward. It was always, more is more sort of approach to playing. And anytime I could sneak in some slap stuff, I was always game for that.
But it seemed to me, when I heard this record, everything seemed to fit so well. Did you guys, when Incubus was in this zone, right? This is record number 3. We're talking Science right now. By Science, did you guys feel really melded as a band? Did you feel like, were you rehearsing a lot? How did that process happen?
By the 3rd record, we'd actually done a fair amount of touring. We played a lot of shows. We started as a high school band, so we were rehearsing multiple times a week, if not almost every day.
I loved those days, like 3 times a week with the boys.
We had a setup. It very early on, it was at my house. That didn't work out. It went to Jose, drummer's house. That certainly didn't work out. And then guitar player Mike, his parents were willing, actually we rehearsed at Brandon's house for a while, and then we ended up at Mike's house. We basically lived there, attempted some half-ass soundproofing, and we were constantly playing.
Right.
And then we started playing shows. We reached a point, by the time that Science actually came out, we had toured pretty extensively. And so we'd gelled as a band. We had written a number of songs at that point and had started to understand what songwriting was and what an actual song, like a song didn't have to just be every part you could possibly think of just jammed into one song.
Sure.
So there is an arc to the band's music as we start understanding more about melody and harmony and actual songwriting. Yeah, ideas would come a few different ways. We would each, Mike and I would each bring ideas in. And then there was the jam stuff, that soundcheck jams or rehearsal room jams when you were writing for a record. And, eventually you just kind of figure out what's going to work for you. So all along, or subsequent later records were definitely everybody kind of independently working and then coming together to bring it all home. It was a fascinating time, but we were really, really young. I think Science came out when I was 21.
That is crazy.
It is crazy now when I think back on it. Like I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I can't say that any of us really did. But
were you writing riffs? Like take that Shade of Green verse thing, for example. Were you writing that? Is Mike writing it and you're filling in the slap part? Like how did that happen?
That particular one, I kind of feel like Mike probably had the chorus figure, the Phrygian, as I said.
Yeah.
And the slap part, I'm just, apologies to anybody if I get this wrong, because it was a long time ago. I used to, I've lived a hard life, so I don't remember everything. But that would strike me as the kind of thing that I probably would have contributed, because I don't know how you would say to somebody like, hey, why don't you do a triple octuplet blah, 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 thing? Like, no,
Sure.
it's, there's just something you're messing around with at home. And those were exercises that I used to do for myself. Slap stuff, and then, okay, can you do it as a triplet? Can you do it with 4? Can you do it with 5? Can you walk it back? And then, some of the other songs that we'll maybe talk about, that's how some of those licks would be. They were just exercise licks that, I'm like, well, we got to put this in a song. Wouldn't that be great? I was like, yeah, it was great for me. I don't know if it was great for anybody else.
Right, because you're working on getting that hand coordination together, and then it ends up in a tune.
Yeah, a lot of it's just ego stuff. Like, look what I learned last night.
Right.
We should totally use this.
Oh, man.
This is great.
And you're 20, 21, right? Like working on this stuff. And of course, that's the time when you're like, check it out. I got my hands to do this. But dude, your playing is so like spot on. all that slap stuff feels so pocketed, more so than other bands. I feel like of that era. I just remember thinking, whoa, it sounds so dialed. Do you have something like, do you remember any of those warm-up exercises or any of that stuff that you were working on to get your slap stuff together that you could sort of pass along to people that are wanting to work on it?
There's single note slap stuff, and then with the pop. So one of the things that I learned was there was a couple different ways to do triplets, and some of the faster stuff, and you'll see this in the solo to Redefine.
Yeah.
There's a triplet that can be done. It's almost more of a left-handed muted triplet,
where you're getting that left hand slap in.
Yeah, and then what I figured out was a single hand triplet where it starts with a pop. Back of the hand, thumb.
What?
And then you can kind of combine.
Yes.
So I would do like 1, 2, 3. 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't slap as much as I used to.
Right. Well, you mentioned Redefine. That's next on the list. Should we check it out?
Sure. Yeah.
I just remember hearing that and thinking it was like the coolest, most pocketed thing I had ever heard. I was like, oh, this is now life-changing to me. And it was the combo, right, of the DJ situation, right, that was so cutting edge, like late 90s, having a DJ sound like scratching in your band, like incredible. The combination of the rhythm of that, the drums, your bass, it's just like, oh, this is the evolution of rock.
Yeah, I mean, there was a moment in time when it certainly was, and I know for us at that particular point in time, we started with the idea of like, okay, well, you can use a turntable to manipulate sound and to get some of that percussive sort of element, the same sort of stuff that I would be doing. Over the next several years and the next several records, it became a way more musical sort of approach to actually playing an instrument.
Totally.
Because Kill would press his own vinyl with audio samples that were created specifically for the songs, or would have Brandon's vocals on them, so that live you were actually live playing harmonies and stuff like that.
Oh,
but,
so cool.
the Redefine thing is, it's kind of back to the thing that I was saying, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then of course you play it way faster than it needs to play it. And then it's a quintuplet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, quintuplet. I guess you could play it, but it doesn't have the same bottom end as when you use the back of your hand. And
dude, who else does this? Does anyone else do that technique, the back of the hand thing?
I mean,
Look,
I want to believe that I've actually contributed something amazing that no one else has ever done, but I've come to learn that it's probably not true. But I was never really a double thumb player. You watch Les play bass. I just went and saw him recently, and he still has it. He's still Les. He's doing stuff like that. I catch like the modern guys who are just like incredible players, and that was something that they spent a lot of time on. Because we were such a live band, and it was always about like putting on a show. You can't run around really and jump up and down and hit the double thumb quite like that, or at least I never could. So, I opted to go a slightly different route with something that I could just actually pull off.
Yeah, and perform. Yeah.
Absolutely what it was is perform. And that, the interesting thing about back then, now I feel like I'm like get off my lawn guy because I'm so fucking old.
I love it. Bring it, man. I want it. I want the get off my lawn.
The recording process was not really digital on something like Redefine. So we were recording to tape, which means that the producer engineer, was punching in and punching out. And it's essentially like hitting play and record on a boombox, which, you used to do back in the day to record,
Yes.
80s music on the radio.
Off the radio, of course, yes.
I mean, that's actually how I got really into music was, top 40 countdowns, and I wanted to hear Phil Collins. So we're going to record it at 8:30, and hopefully I'm going to catch Phil Collins.
I love that.
But the punch-in process was this physical process that the engineer would do. Like, you'd start getting ready and you'd get in, and then you got to get out. And if you didn't quite get it, you got to cut tape and glue it back together. And it's, kids today just don't understand the sheer amount of effort that went into what I give you with slap solos such as that.
That's right. Well, I mean, it makes it all the more crazy because it's so locked. I mean, it sounds like it's Beat Detective, or it sounds like it's been edited heavy, but that was before Pro Tools.
Yeah, that record had, I don't think there was any, no, Pro Tools wasn't really a thing then. I think the records after it, eventually it became like mass market or a little, we were early on to that, but it was never about like creating something that couldn't actually be played.
Sure.
Yeah, so, you do it over and over. I wish I could tell you that I did that first take, but I'm guessing that I did not. I mean, I don't think there's any punches. I think I was made to play it until I got it right. But that's the kind of work ethic I have. It's just fucking amazing,
Of course, absolutely. Yeah, we would expect nothing less. Is that the very bass that you played on it as well?
You know what? That's a good question. I think so. I mean, it's at least a museum quality replica of it. I don't, now that I think about it, the bass that I would have had for that would have been a 1997 model Warwick Streamer Stage 2, and I think this is maybe a 99. There's a few little differences. They changed the angle. There's a piece here on the neck. What is yours? Right. Does yours have a flat, or is there a...
It's flat. This one's flat.
See, my original was flat, and then they changed the headstock a little bit. I had heard people actually snap tuners, which I've never seen. I mean, I've had that moment of panic that we've all probably had when you break a string on stage and you're just like, I don't even know how to play bass anymore.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Like, it's the E string or the A string. And you're just like, well, that's it. We'll just take it off and leave the stage.
There are some people who know how to transpose and are good like that. And that's just not me.
Yeah.
No
Did you start out, like when you started with Incubus, let's talk about gear for a second. Mm-hmm. Were you playing Warwick right away? Did you start on something different? What did you start with?
When I started taking lessons, and I told my parents that I wanted lessons, they refused to buy me a bass because they weren't sure I was going to stick with it. Because like most 13-year-olds, I had lots of ideas of things that I was going to do that I just never followed through on. So they rented me a bass for a month when I started taking lessons. And I don't even know what it was, but I can tell you it wasn't nice or fancy. But they saw after a month that I was totally committed to it, and I got a real bass, which was a 1989 white Fender PJ, Japanese. It's the Duff McKagan bass.
Of course. Jazz Bass Special. But
Jazz Bass Special.
Yes.
PJ.
Black neck. Did it have a black neck?
Yep. Black. I still have it. I don't have it with me here, but I still play it.
So
I've
cool.
lost track of it for years, and then I think I let somebody borrow it and they gave it back to me. And that was the bass for Fungus Among Us and Enjoy Incubus. But by the time we got to Science, we got a record deal. There was a little bit of a budget to buy equipment.
Come on, dude, you got that advance a little bit, right?
I got that advance.
Yes.
That advance was not nearly as much money as I, come to realize I'm still probably paying that advance off. The record, the record business is not what it's cracked up to be.
Yeah.
But by 97, 96, 97, I bought with, I think, a discount, a Warwick, and I was just hooked because maybe much like you, Stuart Zender, the Warwick catalog, it was, a lot of guys would probably have like pinups of women in like skimpy clothes. I had like the Stuart Zender catalog pinup, and he looked so dope. I'm like, I just want to be that guy.
I know.
And this was at a time when Jamiroquai was just kind of coming out and blowing up, and I hadn't really heard a modern funk take that was quite like that. It was accessible, great singing, great melodies, and man, that guy was just funky.
Unbelievably funky. Yeah, I mean, huge. Yes. Zender.
So I'd
didn't
stare
know
at the
he was a
catalog.
big influence for you. That's so cool.
He absolutely was, in a way that, like, in 1991, it was Faith No More and Billy Gould. It was Mike Patton's other project, Mr. Bungle, Trevor Dunn.
Of course, yes.
And then you start getting into Primus, which I was never going to be able to play. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. Couldn't play it. Chili Peppers, which I always liked, but we had, as a band, a little bit of a heavier influence because this was grunge. I mean, I grew up listening to Metallica and, Iron Maiden, like Steve Harris.
Yes, of course.
He point at you on the stage and,
yes.
And put his foot up on the monitor and was just going to gallop. Like Number of the Beast, all that stuff.
Oh, I love that you have that. Just, dude, it's so great that you just have that queued up in your memory. That's amazing.
That made a mark because for me as a musician, I kind of fell into bass. In 6th grade, there was a talent show, and friends of mine decided to put on a lip-synced version of Whitesnake's Here I Go Again. Why wouldn't you? It was like 1987, 1988. It was the thing to do. I had a friend who played drums. He was in the band. I had a friend who played guitar. He was in the band. There was a dude who played bass, so he was in the band. And suddenly, I didn't have an instrument, so I did lights. And to this day, I resent it. I mean, the lights were amazing when I did them, but
they were.
I decided that I'm like, all right, I'm going to play bass because my friends already played the other instruments. And so I kind of fell into this and discovered that the music that I was listening to, I seemed to have been drawn to these guys who didn't fit the role of bass player in like a hair metal band, which was a lot of the music that I was listening to, post Appetite for Destruction and, Duff McKagan. Like these were guys who were out front and center, Steve Harris is... Bruce Dickinson's the singer, but it's really Steve Harris's band, let's be honest.
Right, yes, because he's writing all the stuff and
Bruce flies the plane, but Steve Harris plays the bass and writes the songs.
Right.
And then Les, and then all these guys, I'm like, oh, what is it about this? And it's bass forward, it's attitude forward. Mm-hmm. And I think that just kind of fit with my personality. And so I found myself needing to be a little bit up in the mix,
Yeah, for sure. And you choose this instrument too that has this big snappy character. And I feel like Trujillo was playing Warwick's around this time as well, right? Like if you were into Infectious Grooves, or was he playing Tobias or Warwick or something?
He was. I had a Tobias for a hot minute. Somebody lent it to me and I loved it, and it was my introduction to like a 5-string active slappers sort of bass. Which, as much as I loved my Fender PJ, it really wasn't geared towards that.
Right.
Trujillo became a Warwick guy. I'm not sure if in like 90, 91 he was, or if it was Tobias, or even like, I'm not sure. Sound Gear or something like that. But it was definitely an active pickup, sort of thing. And you could hear it in the mix.
I know.
And after playing these things, I'd go to Guitar Center or some of the high-end specialty stores that had basses, and I just, it was like Wayne and Wayne's World. I'd be like, one day it will be mine. I want to play it, and guys like, dude, buy it or get out. Like,
right. Well, and Warwick was just, so did you get your first Warwick at Guitar Center with the Advance?
No. My recollection of this is I managed to get in touch with the people at Warwick. At the time, I was going to college at UCSB up in Santa Barbara, and Warwick's distribution, like their U.S. distribution, was in Ventura, which was maybe 25 minutes from where I went to college. So I just start hanging out there. Can I come by? I'm in a band. I got signed. You know?
Cool. Right.
And I just kind of schmoozed, and
they didn't dude.
Yeah, they didn't give me anything for free, but they cut me a really good deal, and then I became it's like a drug dealer would. Like they give you a little taste, and then I'm like, suddenly I'm coming back for more.
Yeah.
And over the years, it was okay. I've got a 5-string fretted Streamer 2. Where are we with this fretless Streamer 2?
Oh yeah,
and
come on.
So they got me one of those.
Build out the stable with all the different models and all
totally.
the
And then I think I was telling you, and then I had him, I'm like, well, you seem to build that so well. Can you give me a 10-string? I didn't need a 10-string. No one needs a 10-string.
I love
but
that
I
you
got
have a
one.
Warwick 10 string.
I do.
That's
I don't know if I'm going to
Octave
keep
doubles,
it forever and ever,
right?
but yeah, it's a high octave, and I think you pretty much have to play it with a pick because that's a lot of strings and like no spacing. So
did the desire for like an octave double thing come from King's X for you? Did it come from Cheap Trick, Jeff Ament? Like what was the?
I mean the low hanging fruit on that was
Yes.
yeah. So that was a
Yes.
huge record at a pivotal time in my life, which interestingly enough was this always push-pull thing with Incubus where, you could argue, oh, you sound like the Chili Peppers, you sound like Primus, you sound like Faith No More, but grunge was such a thing then,
Yes.
Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, had to blend the heavy. Pantera. I mean,
Oh, of course.
going to be started with Pantera.
Yes. Rex. Oh,
Rex. Yeah. Lots of fun stories about Pantera.
really? Were you out on the road with Pantera?
We used to get opening slots for like unconventional shows, unconventional bands. So Black Sabbath did a reunion tour and it was us opening for Pantera, opening for Black Sabbath.
Amazing.
And, we had some heavy music and that was all we tried to play on a show like that is that,
Sure.
there were just bearded guys drinking beer and get out of the fucking stage.
Right.
But
Yes.
we play all the heavy material, and by the end of it, they're like, "Oh, you guys maybe you're all right." Pantera guys were great, but they were some good old Texas Southern boys, and
Oh, yes.
a lot of drinking, a lot of drinking.
Of course. Let me ask you one more Warwick question. Is the blood flow to your leg now cut off from sitting
Oh,
with it?
are you referring to the fact that this thing weighs a metric ton?
Yes, I am. Because I'm feeling it right now, man. I'm feeling it.
Now that you mention it, it is gone a little numb. I mean, what does this thing weigh? Like 11 pounds, 10 pounds?
Probably. I bet they're 11 pounds, at least this one. And I don't know if they're made out of, what's yours made out of? Is it potentially
I think
Babinga?
it's Babinga and Aphazelia.
Ooh, yeah.
It's the sound of wood, though, and it's absolutely gorgeous. It weighs so much that if you play this for 30 years, like I have, you kind of, I don't know how to really just rest at ease. I've got a gangster lean from the sound of wood because I've had to support this thing for so many years. So people will say like, "Hey, check out my bass. It's the newest. It's made out of air and dragon tears or whatever, and it's like super light." And I'm like, man, that's not a real bass. It's not a real bass until you have to end up in physical therapy.
Do you feel that? Is that sort of baked into your DNA of like real basses are like 10 plus pounds?
It is, and I don't know if that makes me a bass snob or just an idiot.
Right.
But I am a glutton for punishment. That there have been times over the years when people have suggested there was an easier way to do something. I'm like, nah, but there's the right way. Maybe there's the right way, and then there's my way, which is the righter way.
I don't know about yours, but I feel like this one is the only bass I have that's actually like body heavy. There's no headstock dive, but if you let it go, it goes off you that way. It's wild. It's
I've
crazy.
noticed when I put on different basses, like there's some like a jazz wants to sit up here, and you want to kind of play it up. This thing wants to sit at this angle
because of the body, right?
But it was a very comfortable thing because if you look at the neck on this, it's got 24 frets.
It does.
And you can actually get to almost every single one of them,
right?
Because of the way that it sits. I mean, if it sat like that, I don't think I could do that. So for a live bass, it was great for that, especially when I'd like to run around and just.
And dude,
things.
you just did this seg for me. Let's check out some old school Incubus. I asked you how to pronounce this. I was like, is it Hilikus? And you were like, no, this is Hilikus.
Hilikus.
And we've got a live clip. We got to check this out. Yeah, low slinger. Dude, listen to you though. Adidas shirt. Come on, man.
Yeah.
I love it.
Whoops.
This is like
Probably
big
yelling at the
cargo
sound guy.
pants era too, right?
Oh, totally. There were two of me in those pants.
Do you remember what you were yelling at the sound guy there or like the monitor engineer?
Death threats for not being able to hear myself. Yeah, that is definitely a moment in time. Like, are those pants or those shorts?
Right.
They're like capris.
Oh, there's just so much about this era, though, that was so cool. Like, Jose setting up Sideways, dude. You know that influenced so many people. My band was like, oh, we got to set up the drummer Sideways.
Do you know why he sets up Sideways?
Tell me! I need to know.
Oh, this is really simple. He doesn't want to fucking look at me. Because looking at me, no joke, looking at me means having to deal with my eyes as I'm going like faster, slower. And after a while, and God love him, I can understand this. It's like, he's like, you know how the Amish shun people and they just won't look at him? It's like I was shunned. That whole Sideways thing in my recollection.
You're kidding me.
No, there's no like style or anything. It's like, if I turn sideways, then I don't have to look at you judging me about the tempo.
That's incredible. Now, you were like Sting and Stuart Copeland.
Oh. Maybe. Well, maybe actually.
Yeah.
That one might hit a little too close to home, but it ended up becoming a thing for him. I think he still does it now, but notice he wasn't turning sideways facing me, because that wouldn't address the issue. You know, if I'm the issue, then like you need to turn sideways.
I love that so much. Yeah, okay, so you were giving him notes in real time about tempos. I
had an opinion about tempo, and I felt like my internal clock was the only one that mattered.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, you know, I listened to that in the, what's that, Hilikus? So that's at a normal tempo. If you start hearing these things on some of the recordings, they're recorded at a tempo that makes no sense. Like, I don't think anybody was on Ritalin or anything like that, but no joke, like the recorded tempo of that song. And there's no swing, there's no feel. I think as we learned how to play more, and certainly this has been an interesting phenomenon for me, like my recollection of those songs is so influenced by the way that I play now. Mm-hmm. So if I hear a recording of that and it's very... Now I swing everything. That's not how any of that stuff was played, because I didn't have any swing back then. So when I hear it after so many years, I don't understand it. You know, I certainly didn't understand the tempo choices, but I also don't understand the feel. And that's also just the benefit of a lot of years of playing music. Your pocket changes. Yes. Pocket gets deeper.
Yes, you settle in, kind of. I have to say, though, man, I mean, that was slower than record tempo. And it was pretty funky. I mean, you guys were funky, man. Like, in a way that some of those bands were trying to be funky, but weren't that funky.
What was it, James Brown or maybe Bootsy was saying, like, you know, about how you hit the one and like just how you hear things. The music that we were listening to was very funky, a lot of it, you know, as much as there was Jamiroquai stuff. We went through an average white band phase.
Oh, sure.
Like pick up the pieces, you know, stuff where you're just like,
so cool. Yes.
Stank face.
Right.
But I came of age with a band where we didn't play cover songs, basically. We were learning the instrument. To this day, I don't know that I know a cover from beginning to end. We just wrote music, and a lot of it wasn't necessarily any good, but we were all about just playing. Back then, it was just how much more stuff can you put into it? So there was no idea of laying into a backbeat and doing something like AC/DC style, even though that wouldn't be considered like funk, you know, just sitting here and working around the groove. No. We're going to play a lot of stuff, a lot of notes, you know, really in your face. And as I've aged, I've learned to not do that quite as much on the funky stuff.
Sure.
But I've also started playing with drummers who do like sit back a little bit more.
Yeah.
Which forces me to do that.
And I think, but that's good because, you know, if you come out in your teenager 20s and you're already just, you know, in that zone, there's nowhere to go. I think I love the trajectory, actually, probably because it's similar to mine, of like playing a bunch of notes, overplaying. You have to go through that. I think, at least for me, I had to go through that to kind of come to the other side, reflect, look back on it and go, there's things about that I don't like. But the youthful spirit of it is so cool because it was necessary, I think, to get to this, more mature aspect of like deeper pocket.
It is a progression, and I do think that it's just the benefit of experience, writing more music, listening to more music. It's been interesting for me over the years to listen to the interpretations of Incubus songs by subsequent bass players, Ben and Nicole.
I'm sure.
And I hear some really cool things, and it's so weird to me because I wouldn't have thought of it. There's a saying, like, you don't know what you don't know. Like, I did what I was hearing at the time. Now, granted, if I played those songs for 20 more years, maybe I would have grown bored of it and done it a different way. But it's always refreshing to me to hear these other interpretations of phrasing and melody, like, that sometimes my mind can't conceive of. And part of that is, you go through that phase of the learning on the job. We didn't have the benefit of being like the Beatles playing in Germany for 4 or 5 hours a night, 7 days a week, playing somebody else's music and then being able to take the lessons from that and working it into our own songwriting. It was, hey, that guy's got long hair. He's singing in the band now. Okay, let's write some songs. They're not going to be good. We're going to overplay because we're excited about the fact that we've got instruments. And you had to do a bunch of that for a few years until you get into, the quote unquote growth. But
right. Well, you bring up this notion of, right, the next bass players, right? So Ben and now Nicole. When Ben joined the band, you were no longer in the band. I remember that as a big Incubus fan as a seismic shift. Absolutely seismic. The difference between Morning View and Crow Left the Murder is huge. And I remember then all my friends and all the bass players I knew were talking about who they liked better, right? And it was this era specific thing. When you go back to that time, how can you speak to at all, like, how you felt about someone new, like Ben Kenney, stepping into your incredibly hard shoes to fill?
It was a little bit surreal. But interestingly enough, like, the first couple singles from that record, I really liked the songs. And it was just a trip because it's somebody else's vision, but because I was never a part of those tunes, I just know that I wouldn't have written it that way. And what he did was absolutely perfect for what that was. It's been a big bone of contention over the years of like, oh, well, this is different. And, I don't know if all the slap stuff that I would do in some of those earlier tunes got played the same way.
Sure.
But I mean, it's not my place to say which is better or which is not. I liked, Animali and a couple of other tunes on that record. I just thought they were great. They were really cool. And it wouldn't have sounded like that. If somebody loves those songs, trust me, it wouldn't have sounded like that if I played it. And they probably wouldn't have loved it. I think that anytime you, as a bass player, if you were putting your own stamp on something, that you do your thing. Like, my thing's my thing, for better or for worse. If tone's in the hands for the most part, then like my tone's just the way that I play it. My approach is, formed by all the years of how I've done it. And it's the same for everybody else. Now, some guys are chameleons and, the studio cats who you go in there and like, if you're going to get Pino to come in, I mean, granted, Pino's got a thing. Pino's got a lot of things.
Yes.
He's got a deeper pocket than me. Although, that being said, did you see the size of the pants or shorts that I was wearing in that video? I don't know if there was a deeper pocket, to be honest with you. I mean, the pocket was like 3 feet deep. But there's these cats who can just chameleon and come in and play whatever. And I struggle sometimes in not being me. Now, I've gotten a little bit better at it over the years as my musical palette has sort of changed, and I've learned how to mellow out about that. But you do you, I do me. Ben did him at that moment in time, and it needed to be that way.
Right. Yep.
Because I don't think that trying to be me was going to sound right. It would sound like you were trying to be me. So he sounded like
Agreed.
Ben.
Yes.
Props.
Well, and for as an Incubus fan, a really intense Incubus fan in real time in that era, I really, in the beginning, really grieved the loss of you.
The emotional loss.
I did. I mean, I grieved it. And then slowly but surely, I accepted the new reality, and really then was like, oh, yeah, okay, this guy's bringing in a different thing. I liked some of his pick playing. Like I really got on board. But what an interesting, there was very much to me like this chasm between those two records. And it's just really, it's so amazing to hear you talk about that. You have a lot of health around how you're talking about it. You do.
Look, it's the benefit of the wisdom, if there is such a thing, that comes from not being emotionally attached to a rough situation and a crazy time in my life. Yeah. I've had a lot of years to kind of reflect on what it all means, some of the great things, some of the hard things. In order for me personally, just to continue to be a happy person in general, no matter what it is, I can't be stuck in 20, 25 years ago.
Of course.
And I like to think there's a lesson in anything and everything that happens in our lives. It's just, when can you hear that and when can you learn that lesson? Mm-hmm. So, even as a bass player, I've learned some more lessons about that. And I listen to the early stuff and, I don't think they play anything really off of Fungus Among Us or Enjoy Incubus anymore. And part of me gets it and part of me is sad. It's like, you don't need to be embarrassed. It's
right.
It's a part of our history.
Absolutely.
It happened.
Yeah.
It actually happened, for better or for worse.
It happened, and a lot of people loved it, right? It happened, and it was very it mattered to a lot of people.
Well, and I think that's been one of my, I was say it's a pet peeve. It's in not embracing that to a certain extent. I understand not wanting to play those records from beginning to end. Novelty aside, I just, for the people who like, Hilikus and Fungus Among Us and those tunes, like, hey,
right,
support. You're not crazy for liking it. I liked it at the time. I totally did.
Of course.
I find it more of a novelty now, but I think it's still great, for what it was. A bunch of 16-year-old kids on some of those tunes.
Oh, it's so cool. And you just hear the youth in it. And that's awesome. I love it. Hey, let's talk about jazz bass era, because you had this kind of switch. And I actually don't know if you were playing both of the basses simultaneously, but if I'm not mistaken, right, on Battlestar Scralatchtica,
Scralatchtica. Yes, the proper Germanic pronunciation.
Yes. You're playing the jazz bass. Am I right?
I am. I think that may have even been going back to my PJ. I'm not even sure if I had at that particular point in time my 65.
Okay, got it. Well, we have a live clip here, actually. Let's check it out. And I'm pretty sure you're playing your 65 on it in this clip.
He cuts the music with so much clamor.
Rounds on this at this time, right?
Yeah.
It sounds so good, dude. I mean, Mr. Lance, you're talking about pocket over the ages, over the years, but when I'm hearing these clips, you have had a sense, just let me be the one to tell you, you have had a sense of incredible pocket for a very, very long time. And I'm sure it's refined, but that is a pocketed ass bass line, dude.
Yeah, that was pretty dope. I'm not gonna lie. I didn't think we used to play it that good, but no, that's probably a year into touring and just being like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Compared to some of the early stuff, yeah. And this right now, it's that bass, same bass. This has got flats on it, so the tone's a little bit different.
Come on.
So, I mean, it's definitely this. I like the other sound as well, but I just can't keep going back and forth between, flats and rounds.
Sounds like you just need another 65 jazz bass, right? I mean, it's just...
From your lips to God's ears. I'm not going to lie. That wouldn't suck. This tune had some stuff that I cribbed for myself from a bunch of different songs that...
Listen to that. So punchy. Going from like the 5-string Warwick vibe, it is such like a hard right turn into vintage Fender. And so where did that come from for you, and what made you want to do it?
Mike comes out and shows us during Make Yourself. He's got a song. It doesn't have any lyrics, but it's what ends up being Drive. And he plays the acoustic demo because everybody had a Tascam 4-track,
right?
And it's on a cassette, and he plays it in the car, and you can just tell, like, musically there was nothing that I needed to be doing on a Warwick, like, and it was this seminal sort of moment for me to learn how to play to the part play what the song needed right then, and all the song needed was something that sounded like this, and didn't need anything more than that. Frankly, I don't know if there's any more notes in that entire song other than that line, but that was all that it needed because it was a great guitar line, it was a great melody and lyric.
Yes.
And I just needed to get the hell out of the way of it, because you get into that push and pull battle with your guitar player and your drummer of like, how do I turn up and how am I louder than you? No one needs to hear you. I'm the only person that needs to be here. Singer, fuck him. We need more bass. It's only later in life that I've learned to appreciate the note that wasn't played as opposed to the note that was. And it was, you talk about like being deeply uncomfortable with vibrato that way. I seem to be deeply uncomfortable with whole notes at certain points in my life. Like just letting something ring out. I'm like, but if I can't hear it, is it truly, as a tree falls in the forest and I can't hear it, did it really happen?
Right.
You know?
I know what you mean. But also you guys exploded when you were very young. When I saw you in Missoula, Montana, with 311
and Sugar Ray.
In Sugar Ray, I thought that there was a decade between us, and we were essentially the same age, and that is crazy. So you grew up out there on the road, I
think we got a record deal. I was a freshman in college, or it was in between my freshman and sophomore year of college, and all that really meant was, okay, you're gonna make a record, but you're gonna also play a bunch of shows. So get in a van and just drive. Here's a Rand McNally Atlas.
Of course, yes.
And, or a Thomas, I know it was outside of the Thomas Guide range. That was like an LA thing. I don't know if they had those in the Midwest, but here's a map. Go figure out how to get to the East Coast in 4 days. Right. And you just drive and you're happy as a clam because you're getting to do the thing that you've always wanted to do. Yeah. And there was not going to be, if some older musician had tried to tell me like, oh, dude, let me tell you how this is going to end up going. I'm like, go fuck you, old man. You don't know me, That's right. And thank God that I had that can-do sort of attitude.
Of course,
and
you have to have some of it. Blissful
ignorance and just a love of playing shows. I mean, you had to have done this too, where you go to some shit kicker bar. There's nobody there besides the bartender and some guy who's face down on the bar. Yep. I mean, I played places that were exactly like the Blues Brothers. Like there's chicken wire, Yep. And you're worried about people throwing stuff, but you're playing and you're 19 and you're like,
it's the best thing
I'm
in the
living
world.
The life.
We've got to take a look at one of, I think, it's one of my favorite bass lines of all time. It's Are You In? Like you play it way up there.
Mm-hmm.
This is a stunning bass line, man.
Oh, thank you.
Same bass, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Flats at this time, or were you running rounds on it?
I think it was rounds, and I just played it a little gentler than I normally would.
Oh. I can't wait to see how you play this.
I'm always figuring about how's this thing going to look, you know?
I love that.
And I got to tell you, it looks and sounds a little bit different if it's just played on the E string for the most part.
Oh.
Now, granted, you now have to jump all the way back here,
That
which
is brutal. That's brutal. I remember
it's not
Scott
smart
and
at
I
all.
working on that, and like,
I had it so much in my head that I remember driving Jose crazy. Granted, Jose, who faces sideways to not look at me,
Yes,
and being
yes.
like, no, man, here's where that kick drum needs to go. That kick drum needs to go. My recollection is that Jose wasn't hearing it quite the same way that I was. And I want to say that Brandon was over my shoulder and he's like, no, I think Dirk's got this one. You should put the kick drum right there. And
like,
so you know, you
lead
get a
singer
nice
coming to your rescue.
Yeah, I mean, if the singer's backing you up, it's it's probably going to happen.
Yeah.
It just swings. It just really swings.
so hard, man. Did that bass line come to you? Did you sing it first? And I guess this is a question for a lot of the stuff that you write. Like, are you driving? Are you singing it? Are you doing yard work and it comes to you? Or are you on your instrument and it comes to you? Like, what's that process look like for you?
I tend to actually write more on guitar than on bass. And then if there's an idea that I like, it makes its way to the bass to figure out how that's going to go. But we had an interesting songwriting process because Mike wrote bass lines too. He would come up with ideas and he'd show me something and then I'd interpret and then he'd react to my interpretation. And the same thing would happen with guitar. I'd write something on guitar. And because I wasn't a great guitar player, more often than not, I was like, he would say things like, well, here's what I think you were trying to do. And, you know, reinterpret it. And then I would have to react on bass to what the part now was.
Well, and I mean, hey, you've played with some other rhythm sections since. I mean, and we talked about your band, the project that you have most recently been a part of, East of June.
So this one was interesting to me because it's kind of like it's almost like an 80s punk rock tune, but
Yes.
I approached it the way that Getty would play it, which it's, you know, she doesn't seem quite in the same register, but it's not that far off. But
It's true.
a lot of, I mean, you can do it with a pick, but it's not quite the,
No,
unless
it's
you're
not
into
the
the
same.
Lemmy stuff, you know, it's just all the hand and you just play hard, you know, I go hard.
Yeah, you do. It's really interesting to see your technique, but you have like a go for itness, right? When you're
I have a
playing the
can-do
bass.
attitude, Ian. I'm just going to say it. I have a can-do attitude, you know.
You do. Let me ask you this. So as you look back on your career, what's a piece of advice that Dirk now would give a young Dirk Lance? What would you tell your younger self?
Listen to more music and more different music. My world got really small because, you know, the monotony of the touring life was you would get up, you would do your press, you would do your sound check, have dinner, play, show, rinse and repeat.
Of course.
There wasn't a lot of time for listening to music and really exploring. When I'm writing now, and especially in the East of June stuff, we'd be working on a song and I'd start asking myself like, well, what does this remind me of? What do I want it to remind me of? And I would allow myself to stop thinking like the bass player and start thinking about the music like a music producer. It's one of the beautiful things of producing somebody who's got an outside opinion who's just not in the weeds the same way. It is often of great benefit to have somebody else be able to come in and be like, yeah, you've got a lot of ideas. You need one, and it just needs to be a good one. And
Right.
maybe you don't need to think that hard about it. I think that's one of the reasons why I find myself drawn back to great songwriting. I'll take a great song, and it doesn't matter if the bass line's smoking. There's all different kinds of smoking bass lines.
Of course.
And I think just allowing myself to be a little bit more open-minded and ultimately serving the song. And, you know, I save the fancy stuff for fancy people. I don't need to be fancy anymore.
Oh man. Well, it was so gracious of you to go back and look at the fancy stuff. Thank you, man, for doing that.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for taking the time. I mean, what a treat for me. There are going to be so many people that love this too. It's just wonderful. So where can we go? Where can everybody go to best support what you're doing now and what you're involved in right now?
People can track me down on socials, generally speaking, Instagram at I am Dirk Lance. You know, I am pivoting a little bit more towards session stuff because I get approached by a fair amount of people who would like me to play on their stuff. And yeah, I'm looking to try and be a little bit more open-minded with different styles of music. And I mean, I'm going to struggle to not be me. So people shouldn't be reaching out to me to play bass and expect me to be other than me. But, you know, I can try and tone me down a little bit.
No way. I mean, I get it. I get it from a session perspective, but yeah, it's I love that you sound like you do, and you have a singular voice on the instrument, and you know, we got to uncover some of that today. Man, thanks for breaking down these tunes, talking about this classic gear, showing us all these great bass lines. Really fun to get into your head a little bit and see how you create. It's amazing. Hey,
I'm just honored that you asked, and I think it is hilarious and awesome that you were also at that Missoula show.
Absolutely.
That's crazy to me. And I got to tell you what you and Scott have been doing with this. I've been so stoked on just seeing and hearing your guys' takes on not only like the incredible players out there, but then some of the unsung guys who are just doing cool stuff in the mainstream world. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. We will. And everybody in the comments, who else do you want to see? Who else would you like to see us break down, talk about the lines? Let us know, and we will catch you in the next one.